Every Sunday at noon, our town stops breathing. Stores close early, the diner kills its music, and even traffic seems to wait for the first clang from St. Mildred's steeple. 12 rings for 12 apostles, everyone knows that rhythm by heart. It's muscle memory, devotion, and superstition wrapped together. That Sunday began like any other. Bright sun, breeze that carried the smell of wet cedar from the valley, and a sermon lazy enough to lull half the congregation toward naps. I was outside on assignment for the Ashgrove Gazette, taking photos for a puff piece about our living heritage. Reverend Cole's voice droned through open doors. The clock on the tower blinked 11:59, its minute hand trembling like it didn't want to move. When it did, the first note rolled out heavy as weather. Each strike drifted across the valley and ricocheted off windows, pure, measured, confident. 10, 11, 12. Then came one more. The 13th toll rattled through bone instead of air. Its echo didn't fade, it spread, an aftershock slinking through shingles and floorboards. My camera caught the steeple trembling, doves abandoning their nests, clouds bulking inward as if pulled by the sound. Inside the church, the hymn skipped a beat, voices stumbled, then quieted. I told myself it had just misfired, a mechanical glitch, maybe an extra swing of the hammer. But every person in the square turned at once toward that sound, faces draining like film exposed to sunlight. Old Mrs. Harper crossed herself until her knuckles whitened. "Not again," she whispered, voice cracked around the edges of the word. "Not this year." By the time the echo finally died, we could already hear tires squealing from the road that led to the quarry. A young couple shouting a name into the wind, begging for someone to come back. Local police called it a hiking accident later in the day, but people in town stopped counting weeks after that. They counted Sundays. Everyone believed 12 was safe. 13 was inventory. And as the evening light sank behind St. Mildred's spire, I replayed the recording on my phone. Over the static of that extra toll, a voice breathed between the vibrations, soft and human. One taken for blessing. Ashgrove sits hemmed between two ridges like a bead in a rosary string. 13 miles of forest on every side, one road in, one road out, both turning to gravel before they reach the highway. We live slow here, on second-hand faith and first-hand gossip. The church steeple rules the skyline. Everything else just kneels around it. My mother says that's the way it's supposed to be. God first, groceries second, she jokes, but her eyes never quite laugh. Every cupboard in our house holds at least one candle, labeled "For Blessing of the Missing." She lights them after every 13th toll, whispers the psalm of forgiveness, and tells me not to ask who she prays for. Faith works better when you don't interrupt it. No one in Ashgrove admits they're frightened. Instead, they call fear reverence. On Mondays after a 13th Sunday, men in overalls patch the roof of St. Mildred's at cost, as if their free labor pays the debt. The women stock the church pantry until shelves bow under preserved peaches. Hunger doesn't visit those who make an offering, they say. But I've started to notice how generosity here always tastes of panic. School teachers time their lessons to the bells. Kids recite tables in sets of 12, and they stop if someone blurts 13 because the word itself feels like daring lightning. When our radio DJ slips on air and says it during weather reports, the station goes to dead static for a full minute, a blessing pause, our version of commercial break. Still, the old rhythm rules everything. Somewhere deep down, we all agree that the extra chime is a transaction. The question that no one says aloud is with whom. The sheriff keeps neat files labeled "Missing, Unresolved." 43 names, 4 decades, none found. Each folder ends with the same official note. Disappearance coincides with structural malfunction of tower. Malfunction, not miracle. But by the smell of candle wax on each report, I can tell how many officers prayed while typing. This place specializes in pretending salvation is organization. Keep records, keep rituals, and maybe the world won't notice what you've lost. Only, we always notice. Ashgrove hears itself echoed back from that steeple every 13th toll. Proof that our worship isn't conversation anymore. It's obedience. Reverend Andrew Cole arrived in early spring, driving a car that squeaked more than the bell rope and smiling at everyone like he truly expected smiles back. He was maybe 30, too young for the kind of faith that hardens into habit. And he preached with the optimism of a man who thought good intentions could disinfect history. The last pastor had died of heart failure 2 townships away, and Ashgrove had held its breath for a replacement like a guilty child waiting for a teacher. Cole changed everything we considered sacred, except the architecture. He replaced Latin chants with guitar hymns, invited teenagers to sing instead of whisper, and left the church doors unlocked even at night. Faith, he said, shouldn't hide behind schedules. The elders sat through it smiling politely, their eyes like shuttered windows. His first Sunday went smoothly until 11:59. I stayed outside to get a few photos for the Gazette, the kind of cheerful article our editor adored. The choir's last chord drifted through the open doors, and then came the bells. 12 strikes, echoing cleanly down Main Street. Cole stepped into sunlight, relieved. He'd survived his debut. Then the 13th came. He turned as if slapped. For a heartbeat, the steeple seemed to lean closer, drawing him back. Then a second noise, tiny but distinct, slid through the 13th toll. Not an echo, not mechanical. It sounded like someone whispering, "Amen," from inside the bell's bronze throat. Cole stared upward, lips moving soundlessly. When the vibration died away, he sprinted back into the church, nearly tripping on the steps. I followed. Inside, we found the pews empty and the janitor, Reggie Kemp, gone. His mop bucket rolled lazy circles by the altar, water lapping in rhythm. No footprints led to the door, just damp streaks that stopped at the center aisle beneath the rope ladder up to the steeple. By evening, Cole knocked on my door with dirt under his nails and a question I didn't want asked. "You write history, right? Do you know if we've ever had extra bells?" I told him yes, and that it always ended with someone missing. He nodded once, expression fixed somewhere between disbelief and guilt. "I thought updating worship would chase away ghosts," he said. "Maybe it woke them up." He left before I could answer. Behind him on the road, the church bell rope glowed faintly in the window's reflection, gold threads woven through gray hemp, twinkling like veins of something living, remembering its pulse. Cole showed up at the Gazette on Tuesday morning carrying an armful of reels wrapped in cloth. "From the archives," he said, hauling them onto my desk. "They've been recording the bells since the 50s, broadcast them over shortwave for shut-ins." He smiled thinly. "Apparently, we've kept every copy." We threaded the oldest reel into the machine. The hiss filled the newsroom, then the familiar rhythm, 12 decent chimes and an unfortunate extra. In between each note was the scrape of rope against pulley. After the 12th, that sound changed. Thicker, more wet. Right before the 13th strike, a faint voice bled in under the tone. It hummed, "Rock of Ages" backward. "That's not feedback?" I asked. "Same hymn every tape," Cole said. He looked ready to puke. "When you reverse it again, the lyrics change. Instead of 'cleft for me,' it says 'come for me.'" Each reel told the same story. Every 23rd Sunday, the pattern repeated, followed by a brief interruption on the recording, doors slamming, choir screaming, or dead silence. Then, always, the next broadcast would start with smoother, cleaner sound, as if someone had wiped the equipment down from the inside. Cole had searched through church minutes for explanations and found only euphemisms. Incident, special offering, attendance adjusted. He traced them back a full century. "Who keeps writing these reports if the priest vanishes every decade?" he asked. I didn't answer, because the answer felt close and breathing. We played the final reel, dated just before his arrival. The audio began with the usual bells, but the 13th was delayed nearly 30 seconds, drawn out like the bell itself hesitated. When it hit, the recording warped. Underneath the hum, I recognized my own voice from the Sunday article I'd drafted that morning. Ashgrove greets new pastor with renewed faith. I hadn't recorded anything. Cole slammed the stop button. "Maybe the church isn't storing memories," he said quietly. "Maybe the bell is broadcasting them." Outside, noon hit. From the steeple came a metallic cough, the dry echo of an object clearing its throat. We looked at each other, half expecting the 13th ring. It didn't come. Relief settled like dust until the radio on the shelf, one that wasn't even plugged in, pinged once and ticked 12 times. After the 12th, it whispered the 13th, thin, electric, undeniable. And someone screamed in the street below. The next afternoon, Cole insisted on visiting the churchyard. He claimed scripture demanded context, but his hands shook so badly I knew this was penance, not research. A narrow path wound between headstones blackened with age. Rain pooled in the carved letters, turning names into reflections. That was when I saw the pattern. 12 stones per row. Older ones nearest the chapel, new marble edging out toward the fence. At the end of each line stood one more slab, smooth, blank, recently cut. The gravediggers, I realized, weren't waiting for deaths to carve. They were carving appointments. Cole crouched beside a blank marker, dated already with Sunday's date. No name. "Preemptive faith," he muttered. "Every time the bell reaches 13, one of these blank stones gains inscription overnight. No wood chips, no hammer sound, just new letters glinting by sunrise." And someone screamed in the street below. He traced the last engraving, his fingertip stopping at Ella Kemp, the janitor's wife. "She died 3 years ago," he said. "Why would they reuse?" The air bent inward, brittle as old glass. For an instant, mist flowed from the ground, curling around our legs like the exhale of a massive lung. A faint hum, the bell's note, stretched thin through soil, vibrated beneath our boots. Some of the headstones quivered, dust shedding in slow motion, as if adjusting to make room. Cole knelt, ear to granite. "What's inside isn't rotting," he whispered. "They're singing." I pulled him back and glared until the words died in his throat. He looked ashamed, but alive, which mattered more. We left with muddy knees and no evidence, except the rising scent of iron that clung to our clothes all evening. At home, I lined up photographs from the graveyard. Each captured row held 12 stones, none blank. The 13th spot blurred every time, a smear of light, same shape each photo despite different angles. I scanned one into my computer. The blur sharpened itself, without command, into a silhouette of an open mouth. That night, when the church clock struck midnight, my doorbell rang 12 times. The 13th came not as sound, but weight, a single vibration through the floorboards, heavy as a hand resting on my shoulder. When Cole finally invited me into the rectory, it looked less like a home and more like a barricade. Bibles stacked floor to ceiling, every mirror draped with altar cloths. He'd unplugged clocks, boarded the windows, and left one light burning over a table scattered with nails, photographs, and the dismantled pieces of a metronome. He poured coffee strong enough to peel paint and said, "You'll want to record this." He'd tried to stop the bell that morning. "Simple job," he said. "Pull the fuse on the strike motor before Mass." But the fuse box was already open, switch welded to on by black residue that smelled like lightning. At noon, he climbed the steeple anyway, desperate to disprove the curse. "There's no motor," he said flatly. "It should be a mechanical backup, chain drive, counterweight, except it isn't. The cable winds itself from nowhere. A pulse runs through it, like blood." He handed me a small cloth bundle. Inside lay strands of golden gray fiber braided together, resilient as fine wire. He'd cut them from the bell rope. Under light, they shimmered with grease and something softer, almost human. "7 braids of hair," he whispered. "Found the rest in a mason jar in the attic. The label said, 'Founder's Tithe.'" I leaned back, trying to calculate how long hair could survive sealed in that air. Cole kept talking, voice thin and quick like a confession catching fire. He'd heard steps circling above him while repairing shingles, footprints forming in dusk ahead of his. Sometimes they descended, halfway, to the pulpit, then stopped. He'd even tried sleeping in the nave overnight with Odin-nothing incense burning, but every time he drifted off, the floorboards creaked 12 beats, paused, creaked once more. "It's precision that scares me," he said, pressing both palms to the table. "Faith is supposed to rely on chance. This thing operates like appetite." He admitted guilt then, his reforms, his glossed optimism, maybe even his curiosity. "The 13th toll returned because I talked about it. Spoken doubt feeds it, like echo feeding echo." He stared at the booth recorder between us, which means right now we're ringing it again. The power flickered, and the metronome on the table leaped to life, ticking exactly 12 times. The 13th lost as silence so heavy we both heard it anyway. Cole exhaled through clenched teeth. "Write that part down," he said. "People never believe priests scare as easy as everyone else." Cole and I spent the next evening combing through the church's attic, dust heavy enough to breathe through, rafters webbed with decades of bird nests. We found the ledgers sealed in a cedar chest shoved behind old hymnals. The leather cracked like dried fruit, but the ink hadn't faded. Someone, or something, had been oiling these pages. The earliest entry was dated 1879. Ashgrove's founders recorded a single transaction. "Payment rendered for prosperity of land. Bell to be cast in benefactor's name, 1 tone beyond the Lord's dozen. Each Sunday, remembrance due." Cole frowned. "It wasn't a blessing," he said. "It was an invoice." Further pages charted settlements, crops improving after each disappearance, mines avoiding collapses, children surviving epidemics others couldn't. Each year's note repeated the same closing phrase, "Toll makes hold." The handwriting changed steadily over decades, yet the pen strokes remained identical. I felt an animal certainty that the author hadn't died, only shifted hands. Between later pages, someone had pressed photographs of the early congregation. Everyone had 13 people. The 13th face was always blurred mid-motion, reaching toward the camera. Cole traced the image with one trembling finger. "Bound contract," he murmured. 13 soundings to shake heaven's door, one answer from whatever listens beneath it. That night, we pieced together a more sinister geometry, how each bell strike echoed not 12, but 13 times around the valley, bouncing between ridgelines like a corked chant calling itself home. I said the founders wanted prosperity. Cole said it looked more like preservation, a way to keep their devout little haven intact forever. He flipped to the most recent page, blank except for this year already written in neat black type, 2024, and below it, faintly indented as if written under low light, scribe secured. I asked him who counted a scribe. He looked at me. "I'm the preacher," he said quietly. "You're the writer." Lightning flashed outside the attic vent, but no thunder followed. Just the echo of a single bell peal rolling through a clear sky, a sound too heavy to belong to metal. Cole shut the ledger. Whatever made that deal is still keeping score. Cole wanted proof that could survive belief.
"If we recorded ourselves," he said, "the parish can't dismiss the 13th toll as folklore." He meant well, though all good intentions end up sounding like famous last words. Sunday arrived moonless and damp. We climbed the steeple with lanterns and a borrowed digital recorder, the bell hulking above us like an upturned giant skull. Its bronze skin shimmered green with corrosion, pinpricked by small circular dents, fingerprints maybe, if fingers had ever been made of iron. Cobwebs swayed in rhythm with something moving air we couldn't feel. Halfway up the ladder, Cole whispered that he heard more than wind. I listened. Faint footfalls ascending behind us, careful, soft, one at a time. We waited. The sound waited. We climbed. It climbed. But when we turned our lights downward, the ladder steps below remained free of weight, trembling slightly like strings plucked by invisible hands. At the platform, we set up the recorder pointing toward the bell's mouth. Midnight services were long done. The church below was empty. Still, faint humming drifted up. Rock of Ages, reversed again, the words melting into vowel soup. Cole crossed himself out of habit. "Maybe it's only acoustics," I offered, though the air tasted electric. He hit record and said formally into the mic, "Documenting bell mechanism anomaly." The bell answered. Not a ring, not yet, just breath. A draft rattled every loose nail in the steeple. The rope between us tautened as if a weight had grabbed the end. When it finally moved, the first chime tore through my chest like a heartbeat too loud for ribs. We'd triggered it hours early. 12 tolls came steady, each swelling stronger. Between the 12th and 13th, a gap yawned wider than silence, thick enough to taste. Cole swallowed hard, whispering, "Don't say 13 out loud." Then came the sound, not from the bell's hammer, but from inside the metal itself, human voices harmonizing on a note that was both music and scream. Faces pressed outward from the bronze, liquefied features rising like bubbles. One looked exactly like the janitor's. Its mouth opened and released a noise like wet rope twisting. The recorder display flashed red on its own. Live, transmission, remote source detected. Before we could react, the 13th strike landed, slow and deliberate, shaking every joint in the steeple. The voices stopped mid-note. When our hearing recovered, we realized someone else had answered below, the heavy slam of the church's main doors locking from the inside. By the 23rd Sunday, the whole valley smelled of rain and iron. The Gazette refused to print my stories. Anti-tourism, they said, so it was just me, my phone recorder, and Cole pacing trenches into the church aisle. He'd sworn not to let it happen again. The service started normal, hymns too soft, congregation too small. The families who hadn't fled sat clutching one another like confession would hold them down if the floor opened. Cole's sermon, Faith Without Fear, trembled on every consonant. He kept glancing at the steeple rope swaying gently above the pews like a snake waiting to strike. When the clock needle jumped to noon, the first ring came before his closing prayer. A metallic cough, then the deep boom that scraped the paint from rafters. Cole shouted over it, voice cracking, "Go home! Run!" But the command died under the second peal. By the 4th, the windows were bleeding condensation. On the 6th, every candle bent inward toward the altar. I tried to herd the nearest family toward the side doors. The bolts refused to give, vibrating in rhythm with the bell. 11, 12, each tone higher, faster, pulling breath out of lungs. Then the final pause. Cole sprinted for the steeple ladder, yelling above the hum, "If I stop the 13th, it ends."
But before his foot hit the first rung, a shadow rippled over the ceiling, long as lightning, but slower, nearly human. He froze, eyes wide, whispering not to me, but to something unseen hovering near the bell. The 13th toll arrived anyway. It didn't strike, it inhaled. A vacuum slammed every loose hymn book to the floor, and darkness rolled outward from the pulpit, swallowing rows of pews like waves overtaking sand. People disappeared mid-scream, the sound flattening as if removed from a recording. Then sudden stillness. Dust motes drifted in place of parishioners. The church that once seated 300 now held barely 50, all gasping survivors. Cole was not among them. Only the ladder swayed gently, bell rope still trembling with unseen motion. When I checked the recorder, 12 spikes of sound showed clean signal lines. The 13th read empty white space. No data, no static, nothing. But the timestamp still advanced precisely 6.6 seconds, as if something had recorded silence louder than any earthly noise. Outside, the sky remained bright, confusingly cheerful. The circle of ravens above the steeple didn't fly away. They were still counting. I waited until dusk to climb. The congregation had scattered, leaving behind prayer books mashed into the pews like dead birds. Every step groaned wet, soaked in rain that hadn't fallen outside. The air within the steeple was wrong, thick and metallic, like breathing through brass. Halfway up, my flashlight failed. Only the faint blue glow from my recorder's screen kept the world visible. Each rung vibrated as if the tower had caught fever. Above me, the bell swayed gently, though no wind touched it. The rope, what remained of it after Cole's attempts, still hung, twisted and black, humming low. When I reached the platform, I found his coat draped over the railing. No splash of blood, no footprint, just the smell of burnt linen and ozone. The bell loomed before me, ribs etched with a language older than the parish seal, letters curling in bands around its waist. Every groove shone faintly green, wet as if freshly carved. I brushed dust from one curve and saw movement underneath, reflections pivoting behind the metal skin. I leaned closer. Inside the bronze, faces pressed outward, distorted but clear, the missing of Ashgrove. Eyes wide, lips moving in silent recitation. Some I recognized, the janitor, the teenager from the quarry, Mrs. Harper's husband. Mouths opening and closing with a rhythm that matched heartbeats instead of hymns. Cole floated among them near the center, his hand raised as if in benediction or warning. Every strike had printed a new soul inside the bell, like a fossil impression. The recorder slipped from my pocket, clattering against the rim. It didn't bounce, it sank partly into the metal before emerging again, slick with condensation. The device blinked. Recording. Source found. Tiny bursts of whisper layered through static. Write it. Down. When I touched the bell, temperature translated into sound. 100 throats whispering my name backward, syllables chewing on themselves. For a second, Ashgrove unfolded in those vibrations. Fields, homes, families frozen mid-prayer, all breathing to the same unholy beat. Lightning flashed above the rafters, showing the rope tightening without hands. Somewhere beneath my boots, gears turned, though nothing mechanical lived here anymore. The bell lifted an inch, trembling with anticipation. A 14th toll was coming. I ran, tripping down half the ladder before I realized the whispers followed me. Not echoes, names. They were counting upward. I didn't sleep that night. Each time my eyes closed, a pressure built behind my ribs, timed to a rhythm I could almost hum. When the town clocks all blinked midnight simultaneously, an hour early, I knew the next toll would strike without Sunday's permission. I drove to St. Mildred's with 2 things, the shears from the church garden and a jug of kerosene. Rain shivered across the windshield, following me like fingers dragging through glass. The streets were empty, no porch lights, every house posing unconscious, Ashgrove pretending it had already offered enough. Inside the church smelled of copper and damp stone. The bell rope quivered, though the air was still. It pulsed faint light along its braids of hair, every strand tightening and relaxing like muscle memory. I might have prayed if I'd believed anyone listened besides the thing above. I climbed the ladder again, kerosene sloshing against my leg. The bell greeted me with a low hum, not words, just recognition. The etchings on its metal had changed, new lines curved to form the outline of a hand, extended downward. Mine. "I'm ending it," I told it, though my throat throbbed with the effort. The rope fought while I cut, each fiber parting with a hiss, releasing a scent like burnt sugar. Halfway through, the hairs turned warm, bloodless fluid seeping out to slick my gloves. When the final strand snapped, the entire tower convulsed. The bell didn't fall, it screamed. A blast of sound threw me against the wall, rattling windows across town. Through the din, I saw faces inside its surface twisting, not in pain this time, but reprise, like ex-singers taking one last bow. The bell's glow flared white, then disappeared. When silence dropped, it carried weight, thick, necessary. Ashgrove stayed quiet for the first dawn in living memory. People woke claiming to have slept dreamlessly. St. Mildred's roof smoked gently, cross-blackened but standing. I told myself the curse ended, that maybe Cole and the others were freed rather than erased. Yet as I packed my notes later, a wind tunneled through my hallway, steady, rhythmic curvature of air. My phone vibrated on the desk, alert banner flashing. New voice memo, 13 seconds. I hadn't opened the recorder since the steeple. The preview kept playing itself, a single tone long and low, almost too deep to hear. A breath waiting to become a bell. Weeks went by. Nothing rang. The silence felt medicinal at first. Shops reopened, laughter returned to Main Street, and the valley lay still enough that you could hear crickets instead of metal echoes. St. Mildred's bell sat cracked on the steeple floor, green patina flaking off like dead skin. Locals called it a miracle. I called it an intermission. Mayor Lansing organized a thank you service the following month. We gathered under a rebuilt roof while children posed for photographs beside the ruined bell. Each flash produced a faint blue glint across the crack, the way embers wink when you swear the fire's out. When they asked me to speak, I told the condensed, friendly version. Good triumphed, faith was restored, Reverend Cole would be remembered. The crowd applauded. But over the clapping, I heard it, a soft double tap from under the floorboards, like someone knocking from below. Only twice, not 12, not 13, just rehearsal. That night, I reviewed my recorder again. The corrupted memo had multiplied, 57 identical copies, each titled bell13.wave, time-stamped exactly 1 week apart into the future. The first was due in 12 hours. At 11:59 p.m., every phone in town pinged the same notification. Ringtone update, available. Then they chimed once together, a tone too resonant for small speakers, rolling through living rooms and barns like thunder in a tin can. I stepped onto my porch. All along the ridgeline, house lights flickered in perfect tempo, a wave of them, counting. 12 flashes. Then total darkness. The wind that followed was heavy enough to rattle dishes, but oddly rhythmic, as if carrying a pattern lost to speech. I pressed my hands over my ears, but vibration isn't something you can block. It travels through memory. I know this isn't over. I've mailed every page of my notes to neighboring counties, to anyone who'll still open a letter from Ashgrove. This recording goes with them. If you're reading or hearing this now, listen carefully the next time your local bell tower calls the hour. Don't count aloud after 12. Don't whisper the missing number, even as a joke. And if you hear a pause long enough to notice your own heartbeat before the next strike, leave. Because somewhere out there, another town has just built a new steeple, and a voice inside the metal has started learning names again.